On Christmas Eve 1945, the Sodder family, George, Jenny, and 9 of their 10 children, were settling in for a quiet night in their 2-story home just outside Fayetteville, West Virginia. This family was well known in the area, and George, an Italian immigrant, had built a successful trucking business. It was meant to be a night of celebration, but instead, it turned into one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. That night, 5 of the Sodder children vanished without a trace. Decades later, their disappearance remains one of the most baffling mysteries. What happened to the children? Were they kidnapped? Did they die in a fire that consumed their home? Or was there something more sinister at play? The Sodders were a typical hardworking family. George and Jenny had immigrated from Italy and built a life for themselves in America. They had 10 children, though the oldest, Joe, was away in the military during World War II. The other 9 children lived at home. John, 23, George Jr., 16, Marion, 17, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, Betty, 5, and baby Sylvia, 2. On the surface, they were a close-knit, happy family. On Christmas Eve, the younger children had begged their parents to stay up late. Marion, the eldest daughter, had brought home some toys from work, and the younger kids were eager to play. Jenny allowed them to stay up as long as they remembered to turn off the lights and lock the doors before bed. At around 12:30 a.m., the phone rang. Jenny picked it up, and on the other end was a woman with a strange laugh asking for someone Jenny didn't know. Jenny hung up, thinking it was just a prank call. She noticed that the lights were still on, and the door was unlocked. She turned off the lights and went back to bed, assuming that the children had already gone upstairs. A half hour later, Jenny was woken again by a loud thump on the roof, followed by a rolling sound. She lay in bed, waiting for more noise, but when nothing happened, she drifted back to sleep. At around 1:30 a.m., Jenny awoke for the 3rd time. This time, she smelled smoke. Rushing out of bed, she found that George's office, located near the family's bedroom, was on fire. She woke George, and the 2 of them rushed to get the children out of the house. They were able to get John, George Jr., Marion, and Sylvia out, but Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, the daughter, and Betty were trapped inside. George and Jenny screamed for the missing children, but there was no response. George tried to re-enter the house, but the flames were too intense. Desperate, he tried several frantic methods to save his children, but something strange happened at every turn. He raced to grab the ladder that usually sat propped up against the side of the house. It was gone. He then tried to start both of his trucks, which he planned to drive to the house and climb onto the roof. Neither of the trucks, which had worked perfectly fine the day before, would start. Desperate and helpless, George and Jenny could only watch as the fire consumed their home, with 5 of their children trapped inside. The Fayetteville Fire Department was small and largely volunteer-based. Due to a series of communication delays and confusion, they didn't arrive at the Sodder home until 8 a.m., several hours after the fire had already burned the house to the ground. By the time they got there, it was too late. Everything was gone. After a cursory investigation, the fire department concluded that the fire had been caused by faulty wiring, but George and Jenny were not convinced. First, they had recently had the house rewired, and the electrical system was deemed to be in perfect condition. Second, if the fire was caused by faulty wiring, why had the house lights remained on during the early stages of the fire? The most disturbing part of the investigation, however, was the complete lack of any remains. Despite the house being reduced to ashes, no bones or human remains were found. This seemed impossible. Experts later pointed out that even in extremely hot fires, it is rare for bones to be completely destroyed, yet no trace of the 5 missing children was found in the ashes. The Sodders became convinced that their children had not perished in the fire, but had been kidnapped. Several strange events before and after the fire bolstered this theory. A few months earlier, an insurance salesman had visited George and tried to sell him a policy. When George refused, the man became angry and allegedly told him that his house would go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed because of George's outspoken criticism of Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator. Additionally, a telephone repairman later told the Sodders that their phone line had not been burned by the fire, it had been cut. This suggested that someone had tampered with their home before the fire started. Furthermore, Jenny recalled hearing something hit the roof and roll off just before the fire. Some have speculated that this could have been a type of incendiary device. Over the years, there were several reported sightings of the missing children. A woman claimed to have seen them in a passing car while the fire was still burning. Another woman, staying at a hotel in Charleston, West Virginia, said she had seen 4 of the children with 2 men and 2 women, all of Italian descent. The children seemed uneasy, and the adults wouldn't allow the woman to speak to them. Perhaps the strangest incident occurred in 1968, when Jenny received a photograph in the mail. It was of a young man who looked remarkably like Louis Sodder, one of the missing children. On the back of the photo was a cryptic note: Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, Lil boys, a 90132 or 35. Despite efforts to track down the origin of the photo, nothing came of it. Determined to find out what had happened to their children, George and Jenny spent the rest of their lives chasing every lead and tip they could find. They even hired a private investigator, C.C. Tinsley, to look into the case. Tinsley uncovered some shocking details, including the fact that the fire chief, F.J. Morris, had reportedly found a heart in the ashes of the Sodder home. However, when it was later examined, it turned out to be a piece of beef liver, which had never been exposed to the fire. Why Morris planted it remains unknown. In 1949, George Sodder had the site of the fire excavated, and a few small bone fragments were found. However, they were later determined to have come from someone much older than any of the missing children. The bone fragments had not been exposed to fire, raising further questions about how they got there. The Sodders also put up a billboard along Route 16 near the site of their former home with pictures of the missing children and a reward for information. The billboard remained up for more than 40 years, a symbol of their ongoing search for answers. George and Jenny Sodder both died without ever knowing what happened to their children. The surviving Sodder siblings continued the search for a time, but eventually, they too moved on with their lives. To this day, the mystery of the Sodder children remains unsolved. Were they taken from their home that night? And if so, by whom? Why did the fire department take so long to arrive? What happened to the missing ladder, and why wouldn't George's truck start? Were the children's disappearances related to George's outspoken political views? There are no clear answers, and the Sodder Children Disappearance remains one of the most chilling and enduring unsolved mysteries in American history. The case continues to captivate people's imaginations, raising questions about how 5 children could simply vanish into the night, leaving behind nothing but ashes and heartache. The answers are never what they seem, but they're out there, waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe for more true mysteries, and join us as we unravel the unknown. The next clue might be closer than you think.